I did myself a bit of a disservice. Number one is I took the guys to a breakout session and I spoke to them for 45 minutes, and as you can see, many of them have not returned. Tammy spoke to the ladies, and they're here with great anticipation that the goodness will continue on. I don't want to discourage you, but I'm going to be talking for the next 30 minutes. And then I made the biggest mistake. I told the men, I mentioned the word food to them. They're all standing around an empty table out here just waiting for the first of it to go down. So, but we're going to start whether they're here or not. We want to try to keep it on schedule. I've got a few things to say. Eric's going to give us a little bit of instruction, and then we will have lunch here in about 30 minutes. When I was in the airport in Oakland this week coming out here, we were standing in one of those little marts there where you buy water and snacks and all, and they had a magazine, and it said The Big Three. And it was speaking about reportedly the three major problems as it is reported in marriages. The first of those had to do with the subject of money. That money, sometimes it's not enough money that causes problems. And believe it or not, sometimes it's too much money that causes problems. I know what you're thinking. I would like to bear someone's burden for them. The second of the big three is the subject of sex. Sometimes it's because there's not enough of it, and sometimes because there's too much of it, at least by perspective. In fact, it's significant enough that we're going to talk about the subject delicately after lunch. But it is the third biggie that I am most concerned about, and I'll tell you why. Because I believe not only does it cause problems in marriages, but it complicates other problems in marriages, and it is something that can be corrected more easily than other problems, and as such, it contributes greatly to fixing problems in marriage, and that is the subject of communication. Believe it or not, men and women do not speak the same language. Men speak articulately, well thought out, reasonably, gentlemen, I could have got an amen there to bail me out, but seriously, that's right. Seriously, communication is an important part of our marriage. It is something that needs to receive great consideration. The Bible is not by any means silent on the subject of communication. I've listed a number of passages on your handout for your consideration, but the brother of Jesus, James, describes the tongue as a fiery thing that can set ablaze something with just a lash. He describes it as a rudder, though it is apparently small on a ship, that by a simple turn it turns the entire vessel. And he describes it this way: if one is able to master their tongue, basically they can master anything else. From a physiological standpoint, the tongue is the most powerful, is the strongest muscle in the entire body. My wife said it's because I regularly exercise it. That may be the case. But we know that communication can be of great value to a marriage, and it can also be very destructive to a marriage. And so I want to at least introduce some things for your consideration, and then we'll pause for lunch. The first is the absence of good communication. We talk about communication problems in marriage. Most of the time, we gravitate towards those things that are unsightly, the things that are difficult, the words that are not well spoken. But the truth is, many marriages are debilitated by the fact that good communication is not part of the regular routine. I would guess that for many of you, there was some sort of communication that began your relationship. It may not have been verbal. It may have been visual communication. But at some point in time, there was either a, hey, I need you to ask her if she likes me. I need you to ask him, you're his friend, is he interested in me? Or finally came to that climax in which finally one of you gained the confidence or forgot yourself and said, I was just thinking maybe coffee, maybe lunch, maybe dinner, maybe a movie. Maybe if you just got nothing else to do, if you're not too bored, would you like to be with me? And then there's those important conversations, that communication as your relationship builds. I just shared with the men that a couple of weeks after Tammy and I were engaged, I called her and I said, I've got a terribly embarrassing question for a man to ask his fiancée. And she goes, well, what's that? And I said, what's your middle name? I didn't know it. So we had to grow in our communication. We had to do it quickly. 3.5 months doesn't provide a lot of communication, even talking as fast as I do. But then you got to that place in which there was that exchange of vows. That's a communication, right? That promise, that commitment, those expressions of love. And there's probably not been a day that went by that there has not been some form of communication, because any communication expert can tell you, there is no way to not communicate. Even silence can communicate. But I want to encourage you to bring good communication back into your marriage. Some of you are familiar with the play, The Fiddler on the Roof. And in that, the main character, Tevye, comes to his wife. They are the product of kind of an arranged marriage, and they've been together for some time, and there's a great transition culturally and religiously, and he's reached that point that his daughters are interested in getting married, and his world is upside down. And he turns to his wife because of the discussion about marriage and all, and he asks his wife, he says, do you love me? They said, you're a fool. Why? What are you asking such a question? He says, I need to know, do you love me? And she says, we've been married for more than 20 years. I won't sing it for you, but I could. She says, we've been married for more than 20 years. I mean, of course I love you. Can't you tell from that? And he goes, no, but do you love me? She goes, I wash your clothes, I cook your meal, I darn your socks. I mean, what are you wanting? He says, I kind of want you to say it. So she goes through all these things and she says, if that isn't love, I don't know what is. And he says, so you do love me? And she goes, yes, I love you. And he kind of turns grinning to the second audience, the camera, and goes, she loves me. We sometimes forget to say, I love you. I appreciate you. I value you. You are beautiful. You are handsome. We think, well, we've been together. I mean, if she didn't love me, she'd leave me. If he didn't love me, he wouldn't go to work. He wouldn't provide. He wouldn't. But it is something about the spoken word that has great value. It does not have to be elaborate. I have found that a simple, I love you, written on a sticky note and stuck on the mirror when I leave for the day, can have more value if rightly timed than a long, dramatic poem. In fact, the last time I wrote my wife a poem, it was as part of an assignment in a family class, and I worked real hard on it. I gave it to her, and she goes, ah. And I went, what are you talking about? First of all, I thought it was great. Everything rhymed. And that was the point. She goes, you wrote me a poem because it was an assignment, right? So that was the last poem you got, wasn't it? And therein lies the lesson on communication, okay? Find ways to bring good communication back to your marriage. And by that, I don't just mean the undoing of bad. I mean purposefully, intentionally, deliberately begin to say the things that you said in the beginning. I value you. I love you. I appreciate you. I'm sticking with you. Those go a long way to solidifying a marriage. But we also know that at the same time that those little love, and by the way, gentlemen, do not write it on the mirror in your wife's lipstick. She'll go, you took my $15 stick of lipstick and wrote on the mirror. But we also know that in the same way that good communication weaves a marriage, that bad communication can unravel a marriage. You've heard the adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. That's a lie. As a guy that grew up short, and I always laughed off some of those expressions, I can just tell you things like peewee and shorty and scrawny were hurtful words, even though I learned to grow past them. And all of the things that we bring into a marriage can be as biting. In fact, it was a number of, I will say a number of years ago, but it was probably more recent than that. Tammy and I were engaged in a conversation. Tammy and I have no problem with communication. Our problem is keeping the neighbors from hearing us. We were engaged in a conversation, which I'll just give you the end of the story. It ended up that she and I had the same perspective on this particular thing, but because we don't talk the same language, and in that conversation, I made a couple of statements with an attempt to make my point. I thought I was clearing the air, and they shot at the very heart of who she was. And she'll tell you, for about a week, I apologized multiple times every day because I had allowed the communication, which was never intended to be mean-spirited, to do a great deal of damage. I mean, to break her spirit and to frown her countenance and to hurt her heart, which was never the intention. And so, though I may be the one telling you all these good things, sometimes being a practitioner of those things is not very easy, and I understand that. So how are we going to begin to improve our communication? And I've got some suggestions for you. And the first of these is to create a communication safe zone. Let me see if I can explain what I mean by that. One of the worst times to communicate about a problem is in the heat of the moment. When you're upset, when emotions are running rampant and maybe even rage is building, that is not the time in which more reasonable heads prevail. You as a husband may walk in and find that the dishes from last night are still in the sink and you're bothered by that. More likely it's your wife has been gone and come home and found that you have dirtied a bunch of dishes and left them in the sink. That may not be the very best time to discuss that particular process. It may not be that when you are there that you're with everything that goes on with that discussion and you're interested in being right and you're interested that you're going through all of this process there. That may not be the best time. It may be that you need to say, let's cool off a little bit and let's revisit this. It may be that the first thing the next morning, everyone's a little more relaxed and you're rested, that's not a good time either. In other words, you've cooled off a little bit, she leans over and goes, "Good morning, honey," and you go, "Good morning, sweetheart. And while I'm on the subject, I'd like to talk about that sink full of dirty dishes." Not always the best way to start the day. You do it at night. We have a rule at our house, after 10 o'clock, no more serious discussions. And the reason why is because, as I already told you, we're programmed. That's when our day together, we start interacting, but we're tired, we're worn out. Tammy goes to her bath, she's thinking about everything in the world, and during that hour, I'm thinking about nothing at all. And she comes in and begins with, "I was just thinking," and I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. So we finally had to make a rule that after 10 o'clock, because what happens is you don't have enough time to resolve it, or you take so much time that now you're going to bed later, and then you fester on it. One of you isn't going to sleep, and the other deals with it by conking right out, which makes the other one mad the next morning. How come you weren't any more worried about it? And you good smart guys go, "About what?" And it just gets worse all over again. Find a place and find a time in which you can discuss these things openly and honestly. It is here that I recommend that you establish between the two of you a contract, a covenant, if you will, in which you can speak openly and honestly, not hatefully, in such a way that the other says, okay, thank you for telling me what is going on. If it is that the dishes are dirty, or if it is that he won't pick up his underwear off the floor, that you can, without being reactionary or argumentative, say, I want to give you a chance to share that. Pick those. It is not over the Thanksgiving table with friends, family, company all gathered around for you the time to address the fact that she doesn't do something right. Find a time, find a place by mutual agreement where you can come and that you can be openly and honest. Create for yourself a safe zone of communication. The second is to learn to improve your listening. My experience, not only as a communicator and preacher, but as a husband, is that most communication is debilitated not by what is said, but by what is not heard. We are not very good listeners. I don't know if you know this, that the human ear actually is more equipped for hearing than the average dog ear. But our brains are so advanced that it quickly sorts through sounds and discards those that are unimportant. For example, a wife comes to the door and she says, the trash is full. Anybody single? Any single men in here? What? Okay. Gentlemen who are married, would you please tell him what the statement, the trash is full, means? Yeah, thank you. Single guys believe that she is like a cuckoo clock simply reporting on the level of trash that has been accumulated. One lady told Tammy and I that she actually drags the trash can into the middle of the kitchen floor and he every time walks around it. Okay? But she says the trash is full and gets no response, and she gently reminds, she says, the trash is still full. And then, as only a loving wife can, she steps to it and goes, trash full now. And the husband says, huh? We're locked into the game. We're locked into something else. We're not very good listeners. And so we need to work on improving our listening. One couple said that when they have an argument, they determine the winner by the first one to listen to the other one. I think that's a good rule, because sometimes we're on the same side and we're going back and forth, but neither one of us, or at least I can speak that one of us, isn't doing their best at listening. And so improve your listening, and one of the ways that you can do that is by learning to ask before you answer. And what I mean by that is we're so quick to respond that we're preparing our answer, we're not listening, as opposed to saying, okay, what I'm hearing you say is. It serves two purposes. Number one is asking allows us to clarify. So what you're suggesting is that we kill our son and bury him behind the shed. And she responds, no, but that's not a bad idea. I mean, we're working through, but asking in addition to clarifying the subject also grants us then permission to speak. I don't know if you realize this, I learned this in sales, that the one who asks the question, even if he doesn't do most of the talking, actually controls the conversation. You ask about the subjects that are important and you lead the conversation. So you don't relinquish control of the conversation by asking questions. In many respects, you take control of it, you get clarification, and then when they've had a chance to answer, guess what? Now you get an opportunity. Listening is really an important part of the communication process. Thirdly, you need to watch nonverbal communication. Tammy has the ability to speak without ever moving her mouth. I will say something, I go, you don't like that I did that, and she will say, I didn't say a thing. And I said, well, you should have told your face that because you rolled your eyes and winced your mouth and you made it quite clear what you think. For example, I'm listening. Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. She's used that before, I know. It says that with your face, they estimate that with your face alone, you can make some 70,000 different facial expressions, and every single one of them says something. Be careful that with your mouth, you're not saying one thing and your body is giving you away. Learn to master that. And then finally is, I want to suggest that you learn a new language. Here's the communication struggle for us, is that men speak men, right? And women speak women. And we spend all of our married life trying to learn the other language. Now, in my case, it was really hard. Tammy not only spoke English, spoke woman, she spoke Oklahoman. She will feel it to the brim and fill it in her heart, okay? And I'm going, what country are you from? So confusing. One time my son said, I couldn't understand that show from Great Britain. They were all speaking English. I went, oh yeah, okay, but he'd raised by an Okie. He didn't know any better. So I try to figure out what not only she's saying, but what she means. And it's like learning a language, and she's way ahead of me. And in turn, though a man's vocabulary, if you will, is much more limited, she finds herself struggling as well to understand me. And this is where I think the real struggle is. We spend our life, me trying to learn her language and her trying to learn my language. You've heard some people talk about love languages. We're trying to figure out. Here's the deal. May I suggest you forget trying to learn woman if you're a man. And if you're a woman, you will never learn man, so give up on that too. Instead, learn a new language together. I speak a little bit of French that I learned when I was in junior high, and I could throw it out here and everybody go, oh, he speaks French, and that would be the entirety of my French vocabulary. But if Tammy and I decided that we wanted to we're going to go to Paris and we want to be able to speak French, and we get one of those things like Rosetta Stone, or we get something else, we start learning the language. Tammy and I are learning the vocabulary together. And though she is better at linguistics than I am, she might be a little bit more advanced, but the truth is, for the most part, we've learned everything from grammar to syntax to vocabulary together. And so when she speaks, she's speaking at my level because we've learned it together. There is a language that God has given us to speak to our spouse, and it's not man and it's not woman. It's not English. It's not Okie. It's not even Texican, okay? It is the language that I believe actually is described in the familiar love passage of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I want you to think for just a moment, if we could learn a new language as a couple, we could begin to practice and to develop alongside of one another. And I've shown it there because we never have time to exhaust all of these, but simply look at, it's page 10 on your worksheet. Whether you're in pink or the blue, I think it's still page 10. But imagine for just a moment all of those descriptions of love, if those had to do with our communication, with the language we use. Number one, 1 Corinthians 13 says, as we insert communication for love, that communication is patient. My communication patterns me. I'm not very patient. And my language is even more impatient. If we could master patient language, patient communication, we improve our relationship. He says communication is kind. What if we filtered everything that was going to come out of our mouth by that century alone that said, is it kind? And if it is not, then it is discarded. Because the language that we now speak as a couple is a communication that is kind. It is a communication that is not envious. The idea of envy is, I wished I had what they had. And typically in communication, it's, I want the better position. I want to be. So what if we no longer are concerned about being the right one, but we're just interested in us together being right? How about the fact that communication does not boast? You have communication in your family, in your marriage that says, well, I think, well, I like, well, I believe, well, I'm something special. One of the brothers last night told me of a story in which there was a man that thought so much of himself, he had somebody walk behind him and whisper in his ear all the time, "You're just a man. You're just a man," as a reminder. We might be well served to have that kind of communication in our mind in which we're not so big on what our thoughts are and our ideas and boasting about what we have arrived at by conclusion. In other words, we are not those. How about a communication that is not rude? That's to help all of us men who haven't figured out what communication that is kind is. It's communication that's not rude either. That is not offensive. Men are known for burping and belching and scratching, and they can be just quite unpleasant. See, he's cheering that on. Everybody got, it's like the time Tammy told me, "You're acting like your dad." And I said, well, thank you. We're not supposed to be proud of those things. It's supposed to be something to reflect upon, but here's the idea. Sometimes, and I don't mean in vulgar language, we are extremely crude. We say things about our spouse that we would not say about anyone else. If we could stop the rude conversation. How about communication that is not self-seeking? I mean, typically we have these conflicts because I want you to come to my side. I want you to come to my understanding. I want you to give in to my perspective. That's very self-serving. And by the way, self, as I'm convinced, is at the center of every single marriage problem there is. If you can get rid of self, you have fixed all your marriage problems. Oh, if that was as easy to do as it is to say. And then I put here that communication that is not easily angered. Does not go quickly to wrath, one of the translations puts it. That it is not that goes from 0 to 60 in 2.3 seconds. Anger is not what drives it. In fact, what drives it is the very thing that puts anger at bay so that communication can exist. Anger in some ways is like a Sunday morning sermon that goes way too long. In fact, by the way, somebody said recently a sermon goes too long is borderline a hostage situation. But a sermon that goes too long, the preacher's still talking, but nobody's listening. Anger thinks that it's speaking and communicating, and anger needs to be told, don't be fooled in thinking the fact that just because you're talking anger, that everybody's hearing what you're trying to say. That is communication that is not. I think number 8 is a big one. A communication model that keeps no record of wrongs committed. Well, do you remember the last time? Do you know what you did when can you imagine if we actually could grasp the concept of a communication model that did not retreat back to the bag of trash that we have been dragging behind us and reopening all of those old wounds? I'll just tell you right now, there's nobody that thinks that it isn't trash, and bringing the trash out doesn't make the room smell any prettier. It is a kind of communication that says, I'm not keeping track. Well, you told me you would never do this again. That's a communication fueled by what? A wrong committed in the past. It can't be consistent with love. It can't be consistent with our communication. Number 9, if we can form a communication model that does not delight in evil. And you say, well, What kind of communication delights in evil? I'm not talking about encouraging your spouse to do something illegal or immoral. I'm talking about that which is prideful, that which finds its heart in the things that are unsavory. In other words, I'll do anything to win the argument, to win the marital wager here, to be at an advantage. If we can be in those situations where we do not delight in evil, and a communication that rejoices in truth. Now, I'll just tell you right now, often in communication, truth gets discarded for the sake of perspective. In other words, I'm not interested in the right thing, the truthful thing. I just want my thing. But when communication begins to say we are two people working for the exact same objective, what is the answer? What is the truth? What is what's best? If we can communicate that, we have gone a long way, not only in our communication, but in our marriage. And then, simply a communication that protects, that trusts, that hopes, that perseveres. That's a great language to learn. I would encourage you, no matter where your marriage is, that you take that list and begin to say, let's start learning that language. Now, I'll tell you that sometimes those little projects don't always turn out as good as you want them to. My kids were young, and I began to hear some language in my family that I thought it wasn't vulgar and obscene, but I just thought it was inappropriate. And it began with the word B-U-T-T, all the time. And so I had read that, in fact, Dr. James Dobson, Focus on the Family, had said, you know, when you have a problem in your family, call the family together like you would a meeting and just talk about it. Don't just scold and punish. Just have a conversation. Make it a time that you share about something good going on in the family, looking forward to a vacation, and then introduce this theme. So I, being a salesman, a businessman, I got me one of those big white pads. I got the crew together. I had my colored markers. We talked about some upcoming things. I always used to give them a little treasure map for the week ahead, some rewards and all. And I said, you know, there's something else I just was thinking about. I set up my little easel there. I said, there are some words in our family that I've been hearing that I just think we need to take them out of our vocabulary. And I wrote B-U-T-T up there. And I said, for example, I said, I think this is a word that we just become too casual in our speech. I said, I'd like you all to help me make a list of some other words that are inappropriate. I said, now I'm not talking, we all know about the naughty words, right? What followed was a list of words that would have made a Navy man blush. I went, oh, no, not that word. I'm talking about, and I don't even remember what the other, by now I'm rattled already, but I said, I think maybe I wrote the word, I don't even remember, but I wrote another one of those kind of gray words. I said, I'm talking about this kind of word. The next level of suggestions was worse than the first. When I found my daughter, 5-year-old, getting ready to drop some language that I would not expect to hear anything anywhere except maybe on a rap record, I said, party's over. Don't say these two words anymore and let's get going. I mean, that's... However, if we can bring to our awareness this list of a dozen or so things and ask ourselves, is it kind? Is it rude? Is this communication that's self-serving? Is this communication that holds a grudge or accounts for things that have been previously done? Is it patient? Does it hope? Is it that which is about the well-being of another? If we can begin to construct those things in our real love language and learn them together, our communication improves, our marriage improves, and us as individuals, we are better equipped to be what God, I believe, ultimately wants us to be. Eric? He was going to get a moment. So what we're going to do real quick, Eric will be right back in just a minute. We'll do something we normally do when we come back, and then Eric's got just a few instructions about our lunch. Who do we have here? We've got some newlyweds. I came in late. Who's our newlyweds here?
They weren't able to make it.
They got enough today, last night. They got, I was thinking they went, oh, we didn't know it was going to be this hard. They're prayerfully at home. But okay, let's see. I want to know who's been married the least. I need to qualify this. I always ask who's been married the least, who's been married the most. When I get to the most part, I get somebody who says, well, I was married to my first wife and then she died and I was single for a while, I'm married now. They wanted to add it all up. So, who has been married to their current spouse the shortest amount of time? Anybody less than a year? How long?
6 months, February 1st.
Okay, let me just tell you right now, this is a great thing. Normally, she answers and he looks to her because he knows better. And she turned and looked at him. Well done, both of you. Okay, 6 months. How much back here? I saw somebody's hands back here. How long?
8 months.
8 months? That's pretty good. Somebody asked Tammy, Tammy and I not too long ago how long we'd been married, and I said 30 wonderful years, and she goes, we've been married 33. I said it was 30 wonderful years. There were 3 that were bumpy. She knew which 3 I was talking about. Okay. Here you go. There's your very own his and her shoe for you. And I'm just saying, if you're still admitting to it at 8 months down the line, then here we go. There we go. Okay, let's go the other direction. Who has been married to the same spouse for one continuous period of time the longest? Anybody here over 50 years? Okay. How long? 53. How long?
5 months will be 60.
That's not amazing. 2 wonderful people like this probably been married 80 years. Anybody got 60 beat? Raise your hand if you intend to be 60, make it 60. I don't want to say anything. Tammy's hand was not up. Congratulations. And I don't know how I ended up with 2 blues, but if it means anything, Tammy and I are wearing the same colored shoes. It doesn't matter that there's the same color because I noticed they're both left feet. There is a lesson in that. If you find it appropriate, could we congratulate those, both young as well as older? That is well spoken. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. He's got a few bits of instruction. Let me just tell you, when we come back, we've got a very brief session, 1 breakout session, a quick wrap-up, and our day is done. I don't know how you feel. For me, I feel like it's coming to a close before it's even really got started. Some of you are saying, no, we're borderline hostage situation.